So they asked me to, good morning, and they asked me to come, I think, and talk to you today. And they essentially said, teach them, you must. Because I've been around a long time. Now, contrary to nasty rumors that have been spread in Silicon Valley in New York, I am not as old as Yoda, and nor nearly as wise. But I have been around a long time and have had an unusual and interesting career that involves, writing a lot of books about technology and other things, starting PC Magazine, the world's largest tech magazine a long time ago, and the largest product testing lab, and sitting on the Internet Society board and running many startups, some of the foundational internet companies back in the day, first chat site on the internet, first content site, that kind of thing. And in my current role, investor in 165 startups over the last 5 years with my partner and colleagues in the US, and based on all of that experience and everything I've learned over all those years, I have essentially one word to share with you about becoming a startup entrepreneur and running your own company. That's the word. Why would you want to do this to yourself? As one of the folks in the earlier panel said, you live in a beautiful place, which if you do this, you will never see. And you have a family that in most cases, I'm sure, are wonderful people, and you will never see them either. And when I talk to college students who want to be entrepreneurs, I essentially tell them, and I say the same to you, if there's another way you can imagine living or making a living, do it. Being involved in startups is like professional ballet dancing. It's nearly impossible. No one who doesn't do it appreciates how difficult it is. It's painful. You will occasionally bleed. You're in the thrall of people who are always insistent and dominating and occasionally crazy. And it's brutal, awful, short, and that's success. That's as good as it gets. So really, it's not the greatest idea for how to live your life or how to have a career. And many of the things we all believe about it are not true. It is not fun to run a startup. It is painful and challenging and confounding, but not fun. And it's not a great way to get famous. Yes, there are entrepreneurs who are famous, but as I noted last week, there are, as of I think it was last Tuesday, 103 unicorns, startups that currently have a valuation of over $1 billion. Go ahead, name the 103 leaders of those startups. Maybe 2, maybe 3. A lot easier ways to get well known than starting your own company, and it's also not a great way to get rich. It is literally true that I have never yet met an entrepreneur who did this for the money who succeeded. So it could happen, but if your goal is to get rich, go to work for a big company, get a government job. You can change the world by doing a startup, but that's an effect, not a cause. And again, there are lots of other ways to change the world. Join the church. Go to work for an NGO, run for office. But if that's your motivation, this is not the best way to do it. And starting a company is the exact opposite of being powerful. I joke sometimes that I was at a company called Ziff Davis, great big company, billions of dollars. We had all this success. And when I was working for Ziff Davis, my phone rang off the hook. People wanted to see me all the time. I left Ziff Davis for a startup, and people didn't call me for years. You are in a position of very little power when you're running a startup, so that's not the reason. And this is a terrible way to make your mother happy. I've been doing this now for 35 years, and my aged mother still has the tendency to go, now, what is it you do for a living? And there's a part of my family that at this day, with my gray hair and everything, still sort of holds the hope that I'll come to my senses and go back to law school and do what they all wanted me to. I was actually there when Bill Gates started his career, and his dad was a prominent lawyer, and you can sort of see in his family that sense of, oh man, really? And I suspect that Zuckerberg's family only a little while ago stopped with the comments about, well, you could always go back and become a dentist like your father. We all know there's money in dentistry. So there are lots of reasons for not doing a startup. And so my advice to you as the keynote here at your conference is, don't do it. Do something else. But if you're not persuaded to give it all up and go get a normal job, then why should you do it? Well, the reason to start a company, the right reason to start a company, isn't any of these outcomes. It's because you have an idea that you just can't not execute. We should all recognize that being a startup entrepreneur is essentially a form of controlled mania. You're a little nuts to do this. You have to be a little nuts to do this. And what makes you nuts is the idea. This is an idea that I own, that consumes me, that deserves to live. Great, but not completely. If there's one thing we know as investors, there is a very negative correlation between startup success and true believers. I have seen the future, and I know what it is. No, you haven't, and no, you don't. So, yes, it's a great idea. Maybe, and you're a great person, but listening and learning and being open to, oh heck, it's not the way I thought, is extremely important if you want to do this. And you aren't entirely alone. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in conversations with entrepreneurs, particularly technical ones, who are like, they don't get it. None of them get it. They're all stupid. I get it because I'm smart. But I'm the only smart one. In other words, you're a sociopath. So it's important to be out front. But, you know, the old adage, if you're the only one standing alone in a field, you're either a whole lot smarter or a whole lot dumber than everybody around you, is true here. You need to have paid your dues. Now, many startups are created by young people, but almost always, in my experience, they're young people who are doing now in a more intense way something they've already done in some aspect of their lives. So again, it's all too common for us as investors to have somebody come in, I've never worked in a restaurant, I don't know anything about making food, I don't know anything about delivery, I've never held a knife, and I'm going to revolutionize the restaurant business. And no, you're not. Very, very unlikely. Much more likely that you started programming when you were 14, you programmed all through high school, you created your first program when you were 17, you worked for somebody else when you were 19, you were number 2 in a company that did pretty well and you were 21, now you're 23 and you're ready to do it on your own. That makes sense. So one of the things you have to look at is, what are you actually good at? What do you actually do? Where do you actually have some skills and background, whatever age you are, that you can bring to this? And you have to be doing something that's appropriate to your risk and your risk profile. Everybody's different in the way they want to live, in their backgrounds. I'm the heir to the Woolworth fortune, and I don't have to worry about money, and I want to dedicate my life to whatever. Cool. Maybe you're not so much driven by fear because you don't have to worry about where your next meal's coming from, but at least you can take a couple of years spend a bunch of your own money, maybe. But again, every once in a while I'll have entrepreneurs come in. Well, I just got married and we just found out we're having our first child, and I have an ill parent and a special needs sibling, and I have an obligation to the Mormon church to go on travels for 2 years, and I'm going to start my company now anyway. Well, maybe this is not the best time to do that. So what is your risk profile? Can you really dedicate a couple of years to the pain and absolute commitment this requires, leaving everything else aside, or not? Maybe not right now, maybe some other time, but you have to think about it. And it's also important that you're really up for being put down, ignored, misunderstood, terribly paid, brutalized by people like me, investors, and others. When you look at that, the old, it's brutal and terrible and horrible and short. Let's do it again. That has to be your point of view. If you really want to do this, and most importantly of all, you actually have to have a business. This may be the biggest single weakness we see in entrepreneurs who come to our early stage fund. And when is a idea not a business? That's when, almost always. And here's what I mean by that. So we have entrepreneurs show up all the time saying, I don't make it. I don't make sales software. I make it better. I don't make food. I make it, And they're improving something that already exists in some way. And they say, but that way, my tail is going to transform your dog. Maybe, but that's not a company. That's not even a product. That's part of a product. And the number of times you can point at part of a product becoming very important, very valuable, is really small. I'm going to make Salesforce do something it didn't do yesterday. Cool. So what? Nice, not really critical, and not really a business, just an activity. And we see products all the time. I've got the world's next greatest whatever. That's great. How are people going to get it? How are they going to share it? Who's going to use it? Where does it fit? We often just see a product sitting there out in the open, not attached to anything, and a product is not a business all by itself. So again, often in they come, 25 minutes of talking about how great the product is, and no real idea about what the business is that goes with that product. And also, we see a lot of product lines. We're going to make one of these, and one of those, and one of these, and one of those, and one of these, and one of those. When you add it all together, it's incredibly big and important. So again, some of you may even have slide decks that look like this. We have this one product, it doesn't really get that big. But the second product, and then the third product, and you put them all together, and it looks huge. None of them exist now, and you haven't even done the first step. But the entrepreneur acts as if all this exists, and as if just the fact that it exists means that people are going to use it and like it, and it's going to become important and valuable. And that's not true. And we see disembodied technologies all the time. I have a new capability to do X. I can make a satellite talk to your watch. Great. So what? I can make it possible for emoticons to appear in your glasses. Cool. Why? Again, often from technical founders in particular, the fact that they can do something, the fact that they've accomplished something in and of itself is seen as valuable, as an important thing, as something we should all get excited about. But that in and of itself isn't a business. And then services. We see this one all the time. We created something new and we gave it to people and they didn't know how to use it, so we helped them use it by becoming a service provider, and they paid us for helping them use it, and But as soon as they figure it out, they're going to start doing it on their own, and then we're actually going to become a technology company. And that never happens. And services in and of themselves, helping people do things, it's great. I mean, all ad agencies are services. All consulting companies are services. There's nothing wrong with being a service, but it's not in and of itself valuable. And it isn't a great path to creating value. So if you're going to do this, I mean, if you're going to be consumed by an idea and live in a state of essentially controlled mania for the purposes of creating something of value, where does value actually come from when you're building a business? Where are the roots of value? And it's not really where you might think. Because the things I'm going to be talking about here, I very seldom hear from startups and should be hearing about them all the time. Distribution is a key to value. Microsoft became Microsoft, not because they were great programmers. Anybody in this room who's technical knows they aren't great programmers. It's that they had the right to put the operating system on every computer at a time where every computer mattered. And as soon as computers stopped mattering as much and having the operating system on computers mattered less, Microsoft suddenly became a very vulnerable and ordinary-looking organization. That distribution advantage made them who they were. And startups often don't think about distribution. This is the difference between a technology and a company. I wrote DOS, that's one thing. I wrote DOS and can put it on every computer on Earth. That's something else again. Business model innovations. This is probably the single biggest creator of value for startups, and often doesn't even get mentioned. It comes up after the fact. So Netflix is a good example. At its origins, essentially no technological differentiation at all. They just figured out a better way to get movies to people and to make them feel good and have control over it. Uber, a way to use the same information. You got cars, you got the internet, you got people who want to get rides, available to anybody in a different way. Those business model innovations are fundamental. Now, you use technology, you use other things, but if you've got an understanding of here's what I'm doing as a business, where I have a distribution or a business model advantage, if you look at the unicorns, you look at companies that have sold and lasted a long time, that's what they have in common. And often the simplest things are the most powerful. Living over the store and doing an absolutely incredible job of whatever you're doing is key. We have an investment in a company called Boxed. Boxed is really simple. It's essentially, I don't know if you all know what Costco is. It's an American kind of wholesaler where you go in and get large quantities of things cheap. This is essentially Costco on your smartphone. Very simple idea. You can buy toilet paper. You can buy a refrigerator just sitting there on your phone. 22 months, slightly over $100 million in value. Going toward 9 figures in revenue. Because of obsessive focus on doing absolutely everything about that experience perfectly for the customer, for the back end. And so 10 people can show up with the same idea at the same time. And the one that creates value is often the one simply who just executes best. And only then do we get down to deep tech breakthroughs. And the key words there are deep and breakthrough. Most new technologies aren't deep. They're variations on something that already exists, and most new technologies aren't breakthroughs. And to really be important on its own, a technology needs to be both. And that happens rather rarely. And so you have to think about that. You have to think about the fact that it isn't all about the tech when you're creating a new company. In fact, that's what it's about. You can't make any money except from other human beings, and you can't get anything done except through other human beings, and you can't get any funding except from other human beings. So whatever it is your startup is about, it's not about tech, it's about people. And so you have to think about these things. And again, we often see in our fund entrepreneurs not thinking about this. So who's the actual market you're here? So you've probably seen these articles, what's the pain point, what pain do you solve? And that's a real question, for whom? Where do you fit in the world of what? What market do you serve? Who are your customers? And who are the human beings that are going to buy from you or use your service? Buying can mean literally buying goods from you. Buying can mean giving you their time and attention or preference. Who are those people? And how are you going to find them? How are they going to find you? How are you going to... You are coming into existence, which means you are asking people to do something they didn't do before. Human beings don't like doing things they didn't do before. Our nature is to get up in the morning and do today what we did yesterday and what our grandparents did before us. We change much more slowly than technology does, so how are you going to get anybody to change anything? Why would they want to do that? Why would you believe you can get them to do that? And don't fool yourself into thinking you're going to be doing it alone. We're going to get all of this. No, you're not. If you're any good at all and you start getting successful, somebody will copy you. And the world is a big place. So you may be the best at doing what you're doing in Slovenia, but there's somebody in Taiwan who's doing the same thing, and there's somebody in India who's doing something sort of similar, and there's two kids at Carnegie Mellon University who have an idea that if it's successful will completely wipe out what you're doing right now. So you've got to be aware of all of that and be prepared to deal with that degree of complexity and incoming fire, or you can't succeed. And it's about timing as well. So again, for someone who's had a career as long as me and been through, this is my third tech revolution, I've been through God knows how many cycles. I have seen yesterday's failures come back as today's successes over and over again. I've been through internet advertising is everything, through internet advertising is dead, through internet advertising is back, through internet advertising is dead again right now. And so there are questions of timing you have to be aware of. Is this really the right time for you as a person, for this idea, for this approach? Are human beings actually ready to do this? So people are doing things now that if we had showed it to them 5 years ago, they wouldn't have done it. And if you think about today's 13-year-olds, when they are 23 years old, 10 years from now, they're going to be doing things that none of us can imagine right now. So timing is part of this as well, and an important part. And there are some fundamental truths that you have to face if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur. And at the heart of the matter, there's this one. Nobody cares. Nobody cares whether you succeed or not. Nobody cares about your idea. Nobody cares about your team. Nobody cares, period. Most folks get up in the morning and they could care less about what anybody in this room does. You have to make them care. You have to cause that change to happen. Guy Kawasaki, who was the evangelist for Apple and a venture capitalist now in the Valley, says that for startups, the big challenge isn't overcoming the opposition, it's overcoming indifference. Almost everybody could really give a hoot, whether you exist, whether you succeed, whether or not you do anything at all. And that's the challenge you have to overcome. Not just having a whizzy technology, not just having a cool product. And you have to think about where you are in the life of your company, because things have to happen not only in the right time, sort of externally, but internally. So companies go through stages too, and you see enough companies as I do, and they all go through similar stages, just like people all go through similar. They're all individual, they're all different, but they crawl around and they toddle and they walk, and companies are the same. So there's the inception phase. We have a fund that does what we call moment of inception investing. And that's when a group of people get together and they fall into this state of controlled mania, and they convince themselves that the idea is strong enough and their backgrounds are strong enough and the timing is right, and they're just going to do it. And so that's a period of self-conviction. It's a period of externalization of the conviction. You've got to get at least some people, not you, not your kinfolk, to agree with you, give you money or give you time or give you attention. It's a nervous time. It's a time when the deepest inner insecurities you have come out on the surface. If you're a nervous person, it'll bring it out. If you're an angry person, it'll bring it out. If you're a self-righteous person, it'll bring it out. It's a high-stress period. And then it's followed by a period of hope. The alpha works. The test was successful. I found a CTO. Somebody took me into an accelerator program. We're made. This is it. We're actually going to do this. And that's a period of exhilaration. We are going to conquer the world. This is our time. We're going to do this. It's going to be fabulous. Almost always followed by this. And this is maybe where the rubber really hits the road. Hundreds and hundreds of companies in my career, including some where I was the entrepreneur, every single company has this dark night of the soul where everything goes wrong. I'll give you a real example. I'm not making this up, but it's a real company. It happened just a couple of weeks ago. The company does a really cool technology for Apple Watch and for current things where you can communicate using emoticons. It's really neat. But the Apple Watch comes out and there are all kinds of problems with the original hardware, so they're not shipping nearly as many as they plan to. And Apple's going to slow down the spread of that till they get the hardware problems right. And at the same time that happened, this entrepreneur found out that his partner and CTO had a dread disease and simply could not function. So he had to go out and find all new folks to finish the product, which cost him much more money than he thought. So his product is not going to come out as fast as he thought. He had to spend more of his money than he thought. He hadn't gotten the product quite done yet, and the money is almost gone. Nobody wants to pay any attention to him. Nobody cares. And if I had talked to him, well, when I talked to him about 8-10 weeks ago, he was high as a kite. I've got an Apple developer in here writing for the Apple Watch. We have the perfect application for the Apple Watch. Apple's going to promote us like they did the other folks when the new stuff comes out. We're going to be famous and rich, and now maybe he'll go out of business. Or maybe he'll figure a way out. He'll come up with solutions. He'll gut it out and come out the other side of this. And this is really when companies make it or they don't. So we were the very first investors in a company about, I guess, five and a half years ago called Cold Stone Laboratories. And startup, carriage house, Palo Alto, living there literally. They had cots in there. They were living in this ratty carriage house down in southern Palo Alto. They were working on their idea, and the original version of the idea, which they were very high on, didn't actually produce very much. So they just kept turning it over and turning it over and turning it over. Got to a point where they almost ran through the money that our very early stage folks like us gave them until they finally figured it out. And at the time they figured it out, they changed the name of the company to Pinterest. And what they figured out was they started with this idea of, well, a lot of people are putting pictures and words and things up on their refrigerators. They must have some reason too. That's kind of interesting. Let's recreate that experience on the internet and see what happens. And not much happened. But he kept, Ben Silberman, the founder there, kept studying it and turning it over and turning it over and turning it over until he realized that when folks were able to see, women in particular, the pictures of objects, shoes, clothes, housewares, whatever, filtered through the personae of other people, everything changed. They didn't just want the shoes. That wasn't interesting. They wanted her shoes. The lady that everybody in the church looked up to, the mayor, the CEO of Yahoo, Miss America. They wanted to be like that person. And these images arrayed that way allowed them that, and suddenly they were inside the heads of millions, and then off they went. Pivot. We know as investors that what companies believe when they first meet us is often not true. And then they can emerge from the other side and execute against those ideas and grow. But what do you do at what stage, right? So Facebook started with pictures of girls on college campuses, and look what it's doing now. But it was under control at each stage. And it's also important to keep in mind where you are in the tech revolution. So tech revolutions also go through periods of change. So at the beginning, nothing's going to change. Everything's the way it is. And then new ideas emerge. Come on. And there's what I call a pre-Cambrian spring. So suddenly there's thousands. Right now there's Uber this, Uber postage stamps, Uber anything. There are thousands of companies that do that, and everybody falls in love with it. Right now it's the summer of love for big data. Everybody's in love with big data. And it's the pre-Cambrian spring of Internet of Things software. There seems to be one everywhere. Nobody quite knows. And then there's this long fall. The original companies get bought. Suddenly nobody's doing this anymore. Nobody loves it. Everybody's sick of it. There's just been too much of it that causes this winter of disbelief. Oh my gosh. What were we thinking? Why would anybody want to do this? So you see these articles now about social listening. Is that all there is? Who cares? And out of that comes a more sober, and again, this happens over and over again. So enough companies have failed that there's some sense now what really works. But even so, you'll see a lot of writing and things about that. And transcendence then comes. Change in tech revolutions doesn't happen arithmetically. It's Darwinian. There's a sudden shift so that if you can last long enough and recognize where you are in these stages, you can be there when the old order collapses, which happens very quickly. It happens like Berlin happened. Boom, they were there, then they were gone. And nobody's doing it, suddenly everybody's doing it. So nobody was on mobile, and suddenly everybody's on mobile. Very quickly, some myths and realities about dealing with folks like me as a startup person. So one is, all money's the same. No, it's not. It's really, 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 really different. So you don't ever just want to go get money. Money from your mother is very different than money from the Slovenia fund, than from me. And I'm a VC, so I think VCs are pretty cool. VC money is the best. No, it's not. In many cases, it's not the best at all. It's complicated. It's relatively speaking expensive. That you're, and this is a real American problem right now, that the more you raise, the better you are. I'm sorry, I'm a logical guy. Isn't it the less you raise, the better you are? So this is not a contest, and it's not scored by points. We have a lot of companies like this, and we're proud of them. But this isn't really all that true. The higher your value, the more you're worth. I have a company that took $10 million to create $100 million in value. I have a company that took $1 billion to create $2 billion in value. Do the math. Which company actually produced more value? That this is all about getting big fast. It isn't. Almost all of the big winners got big slowly, often more than a decade, sometimes 15 years or more, before they really create huge value. Yeah, we can all point to companies that have gotten valuable in 6 months, but that's extremely not the norm. So some truths about raising money. You have to remember that investors are people too. Why are they doing this? So a government entity has one reason, a VC like me has another reason, a family office has another reason, the funding arm of state government has a different reason, university has a different reason. Who are these people? And remember, they're people, they're not just dollar signs. This is your best source of capital, your customers. If you know your market and you know your buyers and you can get your audience to give you money, then you don't have to give up any of the ownership of the company to get it. And so often entrepreneurs don't think about it. I want money from you. And I'll ask them, what do you want money from me for? Why don't you get it from your customers? That is the greatest way to value. So if you want to be Bill Gates, don't raise much money. Bill Gates owned 33% of Microsoft on the day it went IPO. He raised as little money as he could get away with at every single phase of that business, like little teeny tiny sips. And where did he get his money? From customers. How did he get all that money from customers? Because he had a distribution monopoly. So think about those, and then he created the technology that made that distribution monopoly possible. If you want to be Mark Zuckerberg, develop your company and raise your money in stages. So you don't raise the money to be the dominant company Facebook is now when you're still in college. You raise a little money for what you need to do then, and then more at the next phase, and more at the next phase, and everything about the company unfolds in stages that are under control. Don't get caught up in value. Get focused on terms. It's not just how much you raise. And focus on your unit economics. So again, we often see these up and to the right charts, but then when I ask questions about, so where does that come from? How did you actually do that? They don't know. How much do you get per sale? How much do you get per customer? How much do you get per person in the seats? Why is that good? Again, very simple. Talk to investors when you don't need money. Just meet them as people, just like any other sales situation. Go tell them about your business. Then come back 6 months later and show them how what you said last time is true. And then don't work with jerks. A lot of investors are jerks. A lot of entrepreneurs are jerks too, even successful ones. But life is too short. And remember what kind of company you have. So there's a lot of talk about unicorns, but not every company's a unicorn. Some are rabbits. Rabbits are companies that have opportunities to come quickly, go quickly, and have to be seized quickly. Vine's a pretty good example. Just jump on it. Meerkat, these things right now, move fast. Bears. We have companies that have been huge successes simply because they didn't fail during that winter of disbelief. You recognize you're going into a period of time when things are going to be tough. You were in the magazine business, 9/11 happens, everybody goes away. So survival, recognizing that and becoming the company that survives. Hawks are companies that dive and seize an opportunity. Pinterest was like that. When he realized he was onto something, he went after it ferociously. And then, of course, we do have the unicorns. And a unicorn is a wonderful thing, but not necessarily the best thing. The thing to remember is that they are mythological. It could happen, but it's not a good way to wake up in the morning and focus your attention. So in the end, here are just a few things that come from being old. You'll all get here at some point. You are more important than your idea. 100 people come in with the same idea. One of them is the best person for executing that idea. The person, not just the idea. Are you the right person for this idea at this point in time? Do you have the plan? Silence, more important than speech. We actually had a meeting the other day where the entrepreneur talked, my partner and I timed it for 23 minutes without stopping, without breathing, we think. Learned nothing about us, nothing about our intention. In fact, my partner started working in the middle of it, and the guy didn't even know because it was a conference call. Listen, ask questions, learn. 9 times out of 10, says experience, execution trumps brilliance. Tortoises beat hares. Doing the job over and over again incredibly well is more important than just being brilliant about it. My mentor, Bill Ziff, used to talk about this. Almost always the best decision is to decide not to make a decision because you don't have enough information, you don't know what to do, and anything you do just adds a variable into an already messy system. So just be still and learn. But when you do think something is true, do it. Whenever I've thought it in my career and haven't acted on it, it turned out to be a mistake. Be in the moment and avoid fear. What fear stands for is future events is real. Don't start acting as if they're real. Up or down, just in the moment, do what you can. Take a step forward. This sounds trite, but it really means it. If you and your team love one another, you can do anything. If you are among people who love you, you can do anything. Nobody on their deathbed says, God, I wish I spent more time in the office. It is, and it actually, there are studies correlating, it's the only thing that actually produces happiness in people, is being surrounded by folks who love you. In the moment, it seems like pain will never go away, difficulty will never be passed. You can't tell when the plane drops whether you're crashing or it's clear air turbulence. So it feels like it goes on forever, and at the same time, it's over in a heartbeat. And life is both longer and shorter than you think. So focus on what you have, do the most with it,